He scored 199, but his final answer made Steve Harvey collapse in all the years that Family Feud has been on the air. No one had ever scored 199 points in fast money. That number was so close to perfection that it felt like a miracle all by itself. But on a Friday afternoon in November 2024, a 31-year-old man from Detroit did exactly that. He stood at the podium and answered 4 questions so perfectly that the audience was already on its feet before the 5th answer was even revealed. Then Steve Harvey read the final answer out loud, and he collapsed, not figuratively, not dramatically for the cameras. Steve Harvey's legs gave out underneath him, and he dropped to the studio floor, overwhelmed by what this man had just said and why he had said it. The audience screamed. The family rushed to the podium. And when the full story came out, every single person in that building understood that they had just witnessed something that would never happen on television again. Before we get into this, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel right now. I promise you, what this man said in his final answer will stay with you for the rest of the day. The Brooks family from Detroit, Michigan arrived at the Family Feud studio in Atlanta looking like a family that had walked through fire and come out the other side still holding hands. There were 5 of them, all wearing matching charcoal gray shirts with a small gold ribbon pinned over their hearts. Nobody in the audience knew what the gold ribbon meant. Not yet. But by the end of the taping, that small piece of ribbon would represent something so powerful that people would be ordering them by the thousands. The family was led by a man named Jordan Brooks. He was 31 years old, and he worked as a physical therapist at a rehabilitation center in downtown Detroit. Jordan was the kind of man who did not take up a lot of space when he walked into a room, not because he was small, but because he was deliberate. He listened more than he talked. He observed before he acted. He had the calm, measured energy of someone who spent his days helping people rebuild their bodies after the worst moments of their lives, and who had learned that patience and presence were more healing than any medicine. But there was something else about Jordan that you noticed if you looked carefully. A tiredness that went deeper than a long day at work. A weight behind his smile that suggested he was carrying something heavy, something he had been carrying for a while, and something he had no intention of putting down because the person he was carrying it for was worth every ounce of the burden. Standing next to Jordan was his older brother, Darnell, who was 35 and worked as a long-haul truck driver. Darnell was built like a linebacker, with thick arms and a deep voice that seemed to vibrate through the floor when he spoke. He was the protector of the family, the one who had worked overtime for 6 straight months so Jordan could take unpaid leave from his job without the family losing their apartment. Darnell never talked about what he had done. When Jordan tried to thank him, Darnell would wave his hand and say, "That is what big brothers do. Do not make it weird." Next to Darnell was their mother, Lorraine Brooks, who was 59 years old and had worked as a cafeteria manager at a Detroit public school for 27 years. Lorraine was the foundation of the Brooks family. She was the one who had raised Jordan and Darnell alone after their father left when the boys were 7 and 3. She worked doubles during the school year and picked up catering jobs in the summer so her sons never went without. She taught them that a man's value was not measured by what he had, but by what he was willing to give. That lesson had shaped both of her sons into the men they were, and it was the reason Jordan was standing on that stage today. The 4th member of the team was Jordan's cousin, Tasha, who was 28 and worked as a dental hygienist. Tasha was the energy of the group, the one who kept spirits high even when things were at their lowest. She had organized the Family Feud application as a surprise for the family, telling them they needed something to look forward to, something to smile about during a year that had given them very little reason to smile. And then there was the 5th member of the team. Her name was Nina. She was 29 years old. She was Jordan's wife. And she was the reason for the gold ribbons, the reason for the weight behind Jordan's smile, and the reason this family had traveled from Detroit to Atlanta to stand on a game show stage, even though game shows were the last thing on any of their minds. Nina Brooks had been diagnosed with stage 4 childhood cancer at the age of 9. She had fought it, beaten it, and lived cancer-free for 15 years. She and Jordan had met in college, fallen in love, and gotten married at 24. They had 5 good years together. 5 years of building a life, planning a future, talking about the children they would have and the house they would buy and the places they would travel. Then 8 months ago, the cancer came back. It came back aggressively, and it came back in a place that made treatment difficult and a cure unlikely. Nina had been undergoing chemotherapy for 7 months, and the toll it had taken on her body was visible. She was thin. She moved slowly. The yellow shirt hung loose on her frame, and she wore a soft gray headwrap that covered the hair she had lost during treatment. But Nina's eyes were alive. That was the thing that everyone noticed about her immediately. Despite everything her body was going through, her eyes held a fire that sickness had not been able to touch. She smiled easily, laughed often, and had a habit of reaching out and touching the people around her, a hand on Lorraine's arm, fingers laced through Jordan's, a gentle bump of her shoulder against Tasha's. She stayed connected to the people she loved through physical touch, as if she was reminding herself and them that she was still here, still present, still fighting. The producers had been told about Nina's condition during the application process, but Jordan had made one thing very clear. Nina was not there as a patient. She was not there for sympathy. She was there as a player. She wanted to compete. She wanted to play the game she had watched every weekday afternoon from her treatment chair at the cancer center. She wanted to stand on that stage and feel normal for one day. And if anyone tried to treat her like she was fragile, Jordan said with quiet intensity, they would have a problem. The Brooks family was facing off against the Sullivan family from Indianapolis. The Sullivans were a great family, competitive and fun, exactly the kind of opponents that made for good television. Both families exchanged warm greetings before the taping started. When Lisa Sullivan, their family captain, noticed the gold ribbons on the Brooks family shirts, she touched her own chest and nodded quietly. She understood. Her own mother had been a cancer survivor. No words were needed. Steve Harvey came out and greeted both families. When he reached Nina, he shook her hand gently and said, "How are you doing today, sweetheart?" Nina smiled at him and said, "I am doing great, Mr. Harvey. I'm on television with my family and nobody has tried to take my blood pressure in the last 3 hours, so this is already my best day this month." Steve laughed hard, genuinely caught off guard by her humor. "Girl, I like you already," he said. Nina grinned and squeezed Jordan's hand. The game had not even started yet, and she was already winning. The game was exceptional from the very first question. The Brooks family played like a unit that had been training for this their entire lives, and in a way, they had. Jordan had told the producers that the family had been practicing every night at the cancer center during Nina's treatments. While she sat in the infusion chair with chemicals dripping into her veins, the family would gather around her bed and play mock rounds of Family Feud using questions they found online. The nurses had started joining in, and it became a nightly event that other patients and their families would wander over to watch. It was the 1 hour of the day when the cancer center did not feel like a cancer center. It felt like a living room. It felt like home. That preparation showed on stage. Lorraine gave a #1 answer in the first round that made Steve do a double take. Darnell followed it up with a top answer that he delivered with such casual confidence that the audience laughed and applauded simultaneously. Tasha got a question right that Steve himself admitted he would have gotten wrong. And Nina, despite needing to sit on a stool that the production team had quietly placed at her position because standing for long periods was difficult, played with a sharpness and speed that made the audience forget she was sick at all. She gave 3 consecutive top 3 answers across 2 rounds, and after the third one, Steve looked at her and said, "Ma'am, are you sure you have not been working here longer than me?" Nina shot back, "I have been watching you for years, Mr. Harvey. I learned from the best." The audience loved her, completely, immediately, without reservation. Jordan was quieter during the main game. He gave solid answers when it was his turn, but he was mostly watching Nina. Every time she scored a point, his face lit up. Every time she laughed, he smiled. And every time the game paused between rounds, he would walk over to her stool and whisper something in her ear that nobody else could hear. Whatever he said made her squeeze his hand and nod. They had their own language, the kind that couples develop when they have been through something together that words cannot fully describe. The Brooks family won the main game decisively. When Steve announced they were going to Fast Money, the family erupted. But it was Jordan who stepped forward to play the second round. Nina had played the first round of Fast Money and scored an impressive 87 points, giving strong answers to all 5 questions. Now it was Jordan's turn, and he needed 113 points to win the $20,000. Steve set up the round. "All right, Jordan, you need 113 points. Your wife got you 87. Let us see if you can finish the job." Jordan nodded. He placed his hands on the podium and closed his eyes for just a second. When he opened them, there was something different in his expression. The calm, measured physical therapist was gone. In his place was a man who looked like he was about to do the most important thing he had ever done. 20 seconds on the clock," Steve said. "Here we go. Name something you take with you everywhere." Jordan answered instantly. "Phone. Name an animal that moves slowly. Turtle. Name something a doctor tells you to do more of. Exercise. Name a month people look forward to. December. Name the most important person in your life." Jordan paused. It was a fraction of a second, barely noticeable to anyone who was not paying extremely close attention. Then he said one word, "Nina." The buzzer sounded. The round was over. Steve nodded and began the reveals. "You said phone for something you take everywhere." The board lit up. Number one answer, 38 points. The audience clapped. "You said turtle for an animal that moves slowly." Number one answer, 29 points. Steve's eyebrows went up. The audience got louder. "You said exercise for something a doctor tells you to do more of." Number two answer, 25 points. Strong, very strong. "You said December for a month people look forward to." Number one answer, 44 points. Steve paused. He looked at the score. Jordan had 136 points from his four answers. Combined with Nina's 87, the family total was 223 points. They had already won the $20,000. The game was over. But there was still one answer left to reveal. The audience knew they had won. The family knew they had won. Confetti was probably already loaded, but Steve did not rush to the final answer. Something about it had caught his attention during the round, and now, standing at the board, he was reading it again on the card in his hand with an expression that the audience could not quite decipher. "Your last answer," Steve said slowly. "The most important person in your life. You said Nina." He paused. "But you did not just say Nina. You said something else. You whispered something after you said her name. The microphone picked it up, but I do not think the audience heard it." The studio went quiet. Jordan was standing at the podium, and for the first time all day his composure cracked. His chin trembled. His eyes glistened. He gripped the edge of the podium and nodded. "Yes, sir, I said something else." Steve looked at him. "Do you want me to say it, or do you want to say it?" Jordan shook his head. "You say it, Mr. Harvey. I do not think I can." Steve looked down at the card. He read it silently one more time. Then he looked up at the audience, and his eyes were already wet. "Jordan's full answer to the question, name the most important person in your life, was..." Steve stopped. He pressed his lips together. He tried again. "His answer was, Nina, while I still have her." The 5 words that followed her name landed on that studio like a weight dropped from the ceiling. "While I still have her." 5 words that contained an entire universe of love and grief, and the desperate, aching reality of a man who was watching the person he loved most in the world slip away, and who had turned a game show answer into the most honest thing he had ever said. Steve Harvey's legs buckled. He did not faint. He did not stage a fall. His body simply gave out under the emotional weight of what he had just read. He dropped to one knee, then both knees, then sat back on the stage floor with his head in his hands. The card fell from his fingers. The audience screamed. Producers rushed toward the stage, but Steve waved them off. He was not hurt. He was broken open. Nina was sitting on her stool, and she was crying, not the quiet, dignified tears she had probably planned on if things got emotional. These were the deep, body-shaking sobs of a woman who had just heard her husband say out loud the thing they had both been thinking every single day for 8 months, but had never spoken because speaking it would make it too real. Jordan left the podium and walked to his wife. He kneeled in front of her stool, took her face in his hands, and pressed his forehead against hers. They stayed like that, foreheads together, eyes closed, breathing each other in, while the world around them dissolved into noise and tears. Lorraine was holding Darnell, and the man who drove an 18-wheeler across the country without flinching was sobbing into his mother's shoulder. Tasha had turned away from the cameras, her hand pressed against the wall, her body shaking. The audience was a wreck. People were standing, sitting, holding strangers, covering their faces. The Sullivan family on the other side of the stage was crying without any attempt to stop it. A cameraman later told a reporter that he had been working in television for 15 years and had never cried on the job until that moment. It took nearly 3 minutes for Steve Harvey to get back on his feet. When he did not go back to the podium. He did not check the board. He did not resume the game. He walked straight to Jordan and Nina, who were still kneeling together at Nina's stool, and he sat down on the floor next to them. Right there on the Family Feud stage, Steve Harvey sat on the ground beside a young couple and spoke to them not as a host, but as a man who had just had something fundamental shaken loose inside him. "Jordan," Steve said, his voice raw and stripped of every layer of performance, "what you just said is the most powerful thing I have ever heard on this stage, and I have been on this stage for a very long time." He looked at Nina. "And Nina, the way your husband just told the world how much you mean to him, I need you to hold on to that. I need you to take that with you into every treatment, every hard day, every moment when the fight feels like too much. That man just told the entire world that you are the most important person in his life while he still has you. That is not just love. That is the kind of love that most people spend their whole lives hoping for and never find." Nina smiled through her tears and said something that the microphone barely caught. "I found it at 20 years old in a college library. He was reading a book about bones." The audience, even through their tears, laughed. Jordan laughed too, wiping his eyes. It was an anatomy textbook. I was studying to be a physical therapist. Nina patted his cheek. He was the most boring person in the building, and I loved him immediately. Even Steve laughed, shaking his head. You two are going to be the death of me today, he said, and then he caught himself, and the laughter stopped, and the weight of his words hung in the air for a moment before Nina reached over and squeezed his hand. It is okay, Mr. Harvey. We do not tiptoe around it. Life is too short for that. Literally. Steve looked at her with an expression that was equal parts admiration and heartbreak. Then he stood up and addressed the audience and the cameras. I want everyone watching to understand what just happened here. This family came from Detroit. They have been practicing Family Feud questions every night at a cancer center while Nina receives treatment. They did not come here for pity. They did not come here to tell a sad story. They came here because Nina wanted one normal day. One day where she was not a patient. She was a player. And she played this game better than most healthy people I have seen on this stage. Steve continued, his voice growing stronger. And her husband, Jordan Brooks, scored 199 points in fast money. 199. That is the highest individual fast money score in the history of this show. But I promise you nobody is going to remember the number. They are going to remember what he whispered after his last answer. Nina, while I still have her. That is what love sounds like when it is not performing. That is what love sounds like when it is just telling the truth. The audience gave a standing ovation that lasted so long the producers stopped trying to time it. Steve let it go on. Some moments earned all the time in the world. Then Steve made his announcements. The $20,000 was theirs. But beyond that, Steve's foundation would cover 6 months of Nina's treatment costs, which had been devastating the family financially, even with insurance. He also announced that the show would be making a donation to the cancer center in Detroit where Nina was being treated, specifically to fund the recreation and family program that had been born out of the Brooks family's nightly game show practice sessions. The program would be expanded so every patient on the floor could participate, and it would be named the Nina Brooks Family Game Night. Nina listened to all of it and then said with perfect comedic timing, "Does this mean I have to let other people win, or can I still dominate?" The audience erupted in laughter, and for one beautiful moment, the heaviness in the studio lifted, replaced by something that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. That was Nina's gift. She could carry the weight of the world and still make you laugh. She could face the darkest thing a person can face and still find the light. Jordan stood behind his wife with his hands on her shoulders, and when the laughter settled, he leaned down and whispered something in her ear. The microphone did not catch it this time. But Nina smiled, closed her eyes, and reached up to place her hand over his. Whatever he said, it was enough. It was always enough. When the episode aired 6 weeks later, the 5 whispered words, "While I still have her," became the most searched phrase on the internet for 3 consecutive days. The clip of Steve Harvey reading Jordan's full answer and collapsing to the floor was viewed over 90 million times in the first 2 weeks. It became the most watched Family Feud moment of all time, surpassing every viral clip the show had ever produced. But more than the views and the shares and the trending hashtags, it was the response from ordinary people that told the real story of what Jordan's answer had done. Couples across the country posted videos of themselves watching the clip together and crying. Husbands posted messages to their wives saying, "You are my Nina." Wives posted messages to their husbands saying, "I hope you know you are my most important person." Marriage counselors reported that couples were coming into sessions referencing Jordan's answer and asking how they could love each other with that kind of honesty and urgency, not just when time was running out, but every day. A grief counselor in Oregon wrote an article that went viral in which she argued that Jordan's 5 words had done more to help people confront the reality of loss than any clinical framework she had ever encountered. He did not say he loved her, she wrote. He said he loved her while he still had her. That word, while, contains every lesson I have spent my career trying to teach. Love is not permanent, time is not guaranteed, and the people who understand that do not love less. They love more. The gold ribbon that the Brooks family had worn on their shirts became a symbol. People started wearing gold ribbons in solidarity with Nina and with anyone fighting cancer. The ribbons appeared on lapels at corporate offices, on backpacks at schools, on jerseys at sporting events. A company in Detroit started manufacturing them and donating all proceeds to the cancer center where Nina was being treated. Within 3 months, over 200,000 gold ribbons had been distributed across the country. Steve Harvey dedicated an entire episode of his talk show to the Brooks family 2 months after the Family Feud episode aired. Jordan and Nina walked onto the set to a standing ovation that lasted over 4 minutes. Nina was wearing a gold head wrap this time, and she looked tired but radiant. Steve held her hand through most of the interview, and when he asked Jordan to describe what had been going through his mind during that final fast money answer, Jordan finally told the full story. "Every night at the cancer center, we practiced these questions," Jordan said. "And every night I would think about what I would say if they asked me who the most important person in my life was. I knew they might ask something like that. I practiced saying Nina, just Nina, quick and simple. But when I was standing at that podium and Steve asked the question, something happened. I looked over at her sitting on that stool, and she was smiling at me the way she always smiles at me, like I am the only person in the room. And I thought about how many more times I was going to get to see that smile. And the truth just came out. I could not stop it. I did not want to stop it." Steve asked Nina what she had felt when she heard Steve read the full answer. Nina was quiet for a moment, which was unusual for a woman who always had a quick response. Then she said, "I felt seen, not as a cancer patient, not as someone people feel sorry for, but as a woman whose husband loves her so much that he could not even answer a game show question without the world knowing it. I have been poked and scanned and measured and evaluated by doctors for 8 months." But Jordan's answer was the first time during this whole thing that I felt like someone was looking at me and seeing me, not the cancer, me. Steve had to pause the interview to compose himself. When he came back, he said, "I have interviewed thousands of people in my career, presidents, athletes, movie stars, billionaires. And I am telling you right now, I have never met two people who taught me more about what it means to love somebody than Jordan and Nina Brooks. They did not teach me with a speech or a sermon. They taught me with 5 whispered words on a game show, and I will carry those words with me for the rest of my life." The Nina Brooks Family Game Night program at the Detroit Cancer Center became a model for patient wellness programs across the country. Within a year, 47 cancer treatment centers had adopted similar programs, bringing families together for game nights during treatment. Studies conducted by 2 separate university research teams found that patients who participated in these programs reported significantly lower levels of anxiety and depression, and that their family members reported feeling more connected and less helpless. Jordan's simple idea of playing Family Feud during chemo had become a recognized therapeutic intervention. When Jordan was invited to speak at a medical conference about the program, he said, "I am not a doctor. I am a physical therapist who wanted to make his wife laugh during the worst experience of her life. If that accidentally became medicine, then maybe the medical community should pay more attention to laughter." Nina continued her treatment, and 3 months after the talk show appearance, her doctors delivered news that the family had not dared to hope for. The tumors were shrinking. The chemotherapy, combined with a new immunotherapy protocol that Nina had been enrolled in, was working better than anyone had expected. The cancer was not gone, but it was retreating. For the first time in nearly a year, the word remission was spoken as a possibility rather than a fantasy. When the Brooks family shared the news on social media, the response was staggering. The post received over 8 million likes and was shared by celebrities, athletes, news anchors, and millions of ordinary people who had been following Nina's journey since the Family Feud episode. Steve Harvey reposted it with a single line, "While he still has her just got a whole lot longer. Thank God." The post became the most liked content Steve Harvey had ever shared. 1 year after the episode aired, Jordan and Nina returned to the Family Feud stage for a special follow-up segment. Nina walked onto the stage under her own power, without a stool, without assistance. She was wearing a yellow dress and a gold ribbon pinned over her heart. Her hair was growing back in soft curls underneath a headband. She looked stronger than she had a year earlier, and the audience could see it. They gave her a standing ovation before she reached the podium. Steve greeted them with hugs that lasted long enough to make the audience laugh. Then he turned to the cameras and said, "1 year ago, Jordan Brooks scored 199 points in fast money and whispered 5 words that changed my life. Today, I want to give an update. Nina Brooks is in partial remission." The audience erupted. Nina covered her mouth. Jordan wrapped his arms around her and lifted her off the ground, holding her the way he had wanted to hold her every single day since the diagnosis, not carefully, not gently, but with the full, unrestrained force of a man who was not ready to let go. Steve let the celebration go on for a full minute before he continued. "I asked Jordan before we started taping today if he wanted to update his answer. You know, the most important person in your life." Steve paused. "You know what he said?" "He said, the answer is still Nina, but I do not need the second part anymore." Steve's voice cracked. The audience was in tears again, but these were different tears. These were the tears of relief, of joy, of a story that was not ending the way everyone had feared. Nina took the microphone and addressed the audience directly. A year ago, I sat on a stool on this stage because I could not stand up long enough to play a game. Today, I am standing. A year ago, my husband whispered 5 words that made the whole world cry. Today, I want to say 5 words of my own. She looked at Jordan. You still have me, baby? The studio collapsed, not Steve this time. Everyone. The audience, the crew, the Sullivan family who had been invited back for the segment, Steve Harvey, Lorraine, Darnell, Tasha, every single person in that building fell apart in the best possible way. Jordan pulled Nina close and held her, and she held him right back, and the applause and the tears and the joy washed over them like a wave that had been building for a year and had finally, beautifully broken. Steve Harvey closed the segment with words that became the defining quote of his career. I have been on television for over 30 years. I have made people laugh. I have made people think. But until I met Jordan and Nina Brooks, I do not think I ever truly made people feel. These two showed me that love is not a word. It is not a promise. It is not a ring or a ceremony. Love is a man whispering 5 words on a game show because he could not hold the truth inside for one more second. And love is a woman standing up 1 year later and saying the 5 words back. That is the greatest answer in the history of Family Feud, and it will never be beaten. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another one. Leave a comment below and tell someone in your life that they are your most important person. Share this video with everyone you know because some stories deserve to be heard by the whole world. We will see you in the next one.